So you want the best Sony camera for wedding photography? The A7IV. My name is Mark Bergering. I'm a photographer and filmmaker. I do some gear reviews here on YouTube, and today I'm talking about Sony cameras for wedding photography. I've used a bunch of different ones, and bottom line is I think the Sony A7IV is the best. I'm going to talk through a bunch of features and reasons why I think this camera is awesome. And hopefully you get some value out of that. So originally the A7III, which is the predecessor to this camera, is the camera that inspired me to switch from Canon to Sony. I really liked the mirrorless concept, and Sony, I think, was doing the best mirrorless at that point. And I still think that they are top of the line when it comes to mirrorless cameras. As far as this camera, it still retains a lot of the features of the previous version. It's still lightweight. It's got awesome performance for its size and an awesome selection of lenses. Wedding photographers have high demand when it comes to cameras. They need something fast, versatile, compatible with a lighting system, and produce the best results in quality so that you can convince somebody to hire a professional so you can pay your health insurance and feed your children, and maybe buy a little more gear for next year. You get one chance to capture the first kiss, make magic during 2 minutes of that first dance, and capture the celebration of a lifetime. It's a lot of pressure to put on some equipment, and so you want to choose it wisely. There's a lot of features that make this camera stand out, and gear should complement your shooting style. It can take your work to the next level, but you have to be able to produce amazing images with any equipment. The camera doesn't make the photographer, but it can allow you to make awesome work more quickly in more challenging situations with better dynamic range, ISO performance, autofocus. All those things can really make your job easier. It's not gonna just, you turn it on and it makes great images, but it can really amplify the skill and speed that you already have and make images possible that previously you might have been too slow to capture, or your autofocus just wasn't tracking as quickly and you couldn't get it to focus in low light. So that brings me to the next topic, which is never miss a shot. So let's say you're walking into the getting ready room as a wedding photographer in the morning. You've got your camera on your hip holster and you see something happening right away. You forgot to turn your camera on. Boom, turn on the Sony A7IV and you're ready to take pictures in less than 2 seconds. The previous version, the A7III, it took like 10 seconds to fire up or boot up, and often if I had accidentally turned off my camera, I would miss something. So I love that this camera is faster at starting. Also, something that commonly happens, people walk into a super dark room and they're having a moment and you need to capture it. Well, crank up your ISO. This thing can shoot up to, I think, produce solid images at 12,800. And if you want to push it to 25,600, it'll shoot. I recommend probably looking at turning those images to black and white just because of some of the noise the digital noise you're gonna get at that ISO speed, but it's definitely still usable. Additionally, autofocus is a breeze. You get touch to track, you can get eye or face detect autofocus, and you can get just the typical spot focus all over the screen. There's a bunch to choose from. They all work really quickly and really well. Sony is claiming something like 120 focus calculations per second when you're using autofocus, which basically is going to result in excellent tracking performance. If you're trying to track a moving subject through a scene, put it on AF continuous, AFC, and you'll be able to track that object as it moves. Another improvement, they've gone from 24 on the previous generation to now 33 megapixels. That's just going to allow you to crop in on images and get that tighter framing while still having plenty of resolution to make prints. It also, if you use, you can set one of your custom buttons to switch it to crop mode or APS-C mode, which is just a tighter cropping for the APS-C style lenses. You can use that with full frame lenses and it can turn, say, like a 35mm lens into a 50mm lens or 50mm equivalent with the touch of a button, and you're still getting 16 megapixels, whereas previously I think the older version was only like 10, which starts to feel a little bit constrained. At 16, that's still a decent amount of resolution, and you can kind of have two different lenses in one prime lens if you just switch back and forth between those two modes. Of course, you're still gonna get the distortion and shape, look, feel of whatever lens you're using, but it can allow you to crop in and just frame your shot a little bit better instead of just cropping it in post. They're claiming 15 stops of dynamic range on this camera, which if you're shooting in really high contrast situations like we do here in Colorado, if you're out in the sun, you get just really dark shadows and really bright highlights. That dynamic range is gonna allow you to cover a wider range of brightness. It also, if you happen to under or overexpose your image, it's gonna allow you to, especially if you underexpose it, pull more detail and just manipulate those raw files to get a proper exposure if you happen to mess up your settings or you're trying to work really quickly and you take a shot that's too dark or too bright, better chance of recovering that detail. The awesome battery life came in from the A7 III, now in the A7 IV, your same battery, so that's cross compatible, but you're still gonna get solid performance. I usually use 2 to 3 batteries in a wedding day. I recommend having plenty of batteries, and I've just always been a fan of switching before those like can't miss it moments like ceremony, first dance, those sort of things where you need to be focused on the moment and not on, oh man, I'm out of battery and I need to find my bag because I don't have one in my pocket. So with all those things combined, I think your chances of getting all the shots are highly improved. So if you want to never miss a shot, go with the A7 IV. My next topic, customization. This camera has so many things you can customize. It now has a custom selector for 1, 2, and 3 custom programmable settings on the main dial here. You can switch this video switch now to video mode or S&Q mode if you're shooting hybrid photo and video. It gives you 3 more customizations for each of those modes for a total of 9 custom programmable settings on the main dial here. Also, all the buttons can be customized. You've got essentially 5 custom buttons if you take away, or if you add this record button here on the top. You've now got 4 dials to work with. So previously I used to use, and still do, use shutter speed on this front dial here, aperture on this dial here, and I used to use ISO on this dial here, but now the old exposure compensation dial can be unlocked and locked, and it allows you to set that to whatever you want. It has a continuous scroll now, so now I set that to ISO. Previously, when I used to set this to ISO, I would end up changing things like the drive mode or other things that I had this dial set to, but now I can use that dial for one more custom dial. I recommend you really dig into the menu on this camera. There's just so many things that you can customize. Things like shockless white balance, where you can have it slowly transition the white balance between scenes. That's great for shooting video, but it's also nice in photo if you're transitioning through scenes and you don't want to have a lot of different white balances in a close proximity. That's helpful. The other little feature here is this bottom button on this back dial I would use for silent shutter control, and it's now just a simple press on, press off, whereas previously you had to press it and then select in a menu. It's just faster and easier to use now that they've updated that. In general, weddings are relatively predictable. You can, if you've been to a number of weddings, you can kind of predict what's going to happen. Previously, my gear would sometimes slow me down because I'm trying to transition through those semi-predictable moments, but now you can customize things. You can use those custom settings, memory. You can say program one for inside and one for outside. So I can be on this custom setting for inside, and then I know we're going to be walking through the door and I want to shoot a frame of somebody, you know, during that transition time. I can have preset number 2 to be for outside. So instead of fiddling with aperture or shutter speed, you know, trying to adjust things quickly on the fly, I can just switch that one dial setting, and now I'm set up to properly expose for an outdoor shot. It's things like that that are going to allow, equipment to improve your ability to capture things on the wedding day. Next up, let's talk a little bit more about silent shutter. So that was one of the biggest things that I loved with when I initially switched from the Canon 5Ds to the Sony A7IV was silent shutter. I loved that you could just turn off the shutter, use the electronic shutter, and be completely silent. It's like a wedding photographer's dream to be able to be completely silent, especially, during a quiet, intimate ceremony when people don't want to hear the clicking of a camera shutter. It leads to people being less camera aware. It allows me to get closer and not have people feel that pressure of like hearing the shutter click with each shot I take. So I encourage you, utilize that. Don't be a fly on the wall using a long telephoto lens capturing things from far away. Turn on silent shutter, get close, be present. You can take as many frames as you want because no one can hear you. You can shoot away at 10 frames per second and no one can hear you. And it helps you capture more intimate moments. I do have to mention one caveat. The silent shutter can lead to some serious banding issues. I learned that with the Sony A7 III. I definitely messed up some images. And so if you are gonna be shooting indoors, silent shutter works great outdoors, no issues there. But if you're gonna be shooting indoors, you have to be careful with the type of lights you use, with the type of lights that are present in the room. It's often catches me off guard, and so there's two options. You can just never use silent shutter indoors, or you can test it. So, I just take a few frames throughout the room, make sure that there's no banding issues, and then I'm good to go. But you just have to be really thoughtful with it, because if you switch to a different room and you weren't paying attention, you can encounter one of those lights that creates the black bars across your frame. And if you get that issue, it's pretty much unrecoverable. Those images will get tossed in the trash. If you are shooting with the non-electronic shutter, the mechanical shutter, it's quieter than the previous version. It sounds pretty good, and it doesn't have as sharp as a click, so that's a nice improvement. The other thing to consider is when you're shooting group pictures, I recommend turning the mechanical shutter on. I think it helps people understand when you're taking pictures, that you're taking a bunch of pictures during that time frame, and it'll help people look at the camera and they can hear the shutter going off. Gets a better hit rate in terms of getting everybody looking at the camera at the same time. And then, as I think I mentioned, it's just easy on off, one button, one press, silent shutter, mechanical shutter. Definitely recommend you explore that feature. Next up, I want to talk about the viewfinder and the back screen and some other fun upgrades that have come with this generation. So you now have a sensor on the bottom here as opposed to tucked up on the top of the eye cup. And I think it just leads to a more effective situation where you're getting more responsive transition between using the back screen and using the viewfinder. Sometimes the A7 III would get a little glitchy and it just wouldn't respond as quickly. I appreciate that upgrade makes things smoother. Additionally, the flip out screen allows you to shoot, up above your head and flip it down, or you can shoot like a low vertical shot and still see the frame through the back screen. And then, usually when I'm shooting outdoors, I always judge my exposure through the viewfinder, because if it's bright and sunny, you can look through the viewfinder. It's a higher resolution than the back screen. The back screen the resolution is a little bit low on this thing. That is a little bit room for improvement on the next generation, but judge your exposure through the viewfinder. You'll get an accurate setting there, and then you can shoot away, whether you're shooting on the back screen or through the viewfinder. Two other small upgrades. The eye cup mount, which is this little piece here, is called the eye cup. On the Sony A7 III, I would constantly lose these things. The mount was just not very secure, and it would fall off when I was sliding it into my bag or it was hanging on my belt. And so almost every shoot or every couple of shoots, I'd have to replace at least one of these on one of my camera bodies. But this one seems to be better mounted, so that's awesome. The other cool feature that I like is the fact that you can now close the shutter when the camera is turned off. So right now you can see the sensor directly, but if you turn off the camera, the shutter will close, and that allows you to change lenses. If you shut off the camera while you're changing lenses, you can keep your sensor a little bit cleaner. So Sony cameras, because the sensor, all mirrorless cameras, the sensor is right there. You constantly have to clean it. But I think having that extra layer just keeps it a little bit less dusty and saves time cloning out dust in your images later. Because really, who has time to clean their sensor on a wedding day? Lastly, let's talk about value. So, camera gear is expensive, and this isn't just a hobby. So these are tools that I use to make money. It's a business. And like most things these days, whether you're traveling on an airline, you pay until you're comfortable. So sure, could I buy a $300 Canon 5D Mark II like I used, 10 years ago? Sure, I could do that. I could shoot weddings with that camera. But I choose to use the latest and greatest mirrorless tech because it makes my job easier. It makes my job more comfortable. It makes me faster. It allows me to get pictures that I would be too slow to capture if I was using autofocus that's 10 years old. If you've got unlimited funds, sure, buy the Sony A1, the top of the line mirrorless camera. But most of us would have to shoot a whole wedding just to cover the cost of that $6,500 camera body, not to mention the lenses, lighting equipment, all the other stuff that you're gonna need. So I think the A7IV is a great balance. You're getting some of that trickle down, like autofocus technology in this camera body, but it doesn't break the bank. And I'll probably be keeping the Sony A7 III as a backup camera because that's still a solid camera, but I appreciate the latest and greatest features and little intricacies that just make using this camera a little bit more friendly and less glitchy. If you compare the Sony A7 IV to some of the direct competitors like the Canon R6 or the Nikon Z6 II, this camera body is a little bit priced above those. I think overall, this is gonna be a better value in terms of a whole system because Sony has a lot of great mirrorless specific lenses. So initially when Canon and Nikon transitioned into the mirrorless market, they hadn't developed as many mirrorless specific lenses. So those are gonna be a little bit more compact and lighter weight, better balanced on the camera body. But the fact that Sony has more lenses means there's some cheaper options available. So most focal lengths, there's a number of different choices. And in addition, you've got Samyang, Sigma, Tokina, and other third parties making lenses for this camera system because it's so popular. They're making a ton of focal lengths, and you can get some great glass for really affordable prices, especially initially it was just manual focus lenses, but now there's a ton of autofocus lenses from all of those brands that are gonna be almost as equally well-performing as the native Sony lenses. I built a big spreadsheet when I transitioned from using Canon to using Sony, and I found that overall as a system, it's relatively affordable. So in conclusion, the bottom line, if you pick the Sony A7 IV as your wedding photography camera, you'll never miss a shot, guaranteed. Not really. You'll get a silent shutter, which allows you to get super close to your subject without them feeling uncomfortable with that shutter sound. The custom memory settings allow you to shoot in a variety of lighting situations, and you won't regret your decision. And if you do, then just go get a Canon 5D Mark II for $300 and see how you like it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my review on why I think the A7 IV is the best camera for wedding photographers. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Appreciate you being here. Have a good day.